This is a good question. The basic answer is because people who were with him believed he promised it, and they trusted his promises. However, as with everything Jesus communicates, there is a degree of transcendence to what he says about his return. As he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And Jesus answered them, "See that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains." Matthew chapter 24 verses 3-8 ESV. If you read the rest of Matthew chapter 24, you'll see that there is an essential ambiguity here that undermines every millennial movement in history. Truly, I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. But concerning that day and hour no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. Matthew chapter 24 verses 34-36 ESV. What is this generation? I propose it refers to mankind as it is in the same way that a type of car might have the same characteristics for decades. The next generation might be electric. Are people really different now compared to those hearing these words initially? I think not. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But know this, that if the master of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over his household, to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Matthew chapter 24 verses 42-46 ESV. This is what created a constant expectation of the apocalypse in the early church. I don't think they were mistaken, either. Indeed, Christians in every era, even the year 3000, if there is one, ought to be waiting in the same way. Semper Fidelis, to use a phrase adopted by another group who maintain a state of eternal readiness. In summary, people believe in the return of Jesus because they trust Jesus' words and the people who communicate them. This, sadly, explains how those words can be distorted such that cults deciding the time arise from the misuse of Scripture by its teachers. We need only read Matthew chapter 24 to see how the apostles were taught on this matter. Unsurprisingly, they taught their disciples that every day is to be regarded as the day Christ returns. Because they've been deluded into believing such a thing is true, based on nothing more than a small number of verses written around 2,000 years ago by completely unknown authors in order to promote the then new religion of Christianity to the naive, superstitious and scientifically ignorant people of the time. There's not even any evidence that the biblical character of Jesus ever existed, certainly not as described in the Bible itself, although that character was probably based on one of the many messianic preachers who was crucified for sedition. Sometime during the 40s CE, Paul, Saul of Tarsus, started a new Jewish sect, and as part of this, he followed a long-established tradition of posthumously appointing someone to act as the figurehead, in the process deifying this person, who he perhaps had known, claiming they had a God as a father, could perform miracles, and were resurrected after their death. Such claims were believed in implicitly by the naive and ignorant people of the time and were almost guaranteed to gather a following for the sect or religion concerned. The very first reference we have to Jesus is in Paul's first epistle to the Thessalonians, written in either 50 or 51 CE, getting on for 20 years after the supposed crucifixion of the person on whom he, Paul, based his figurehead. Then, other than a relatively few and generally uninformative references to Jesus in Paul's other epistles, all dated to between 50 and 60 CE, there's nothing until an unknown scribe wrote what is now called the Gospel of Mark around the year 70 CE. In this, the unknown writer went on to describe in some detail supposed events which had occurred during the life of Jesus, however, they're mythical, not factual, being what's called midrash. This was a theological literary technique which took stories of claimed miracles performed by characters from Jewish mythology, such as Moses, Jonah, Elijah and Elisha, rewrote them into a then-contemporary setting and attributed them to Jesus. This was done to show the Jews of the time that the new religion of Christianity was based on their traditional beliefs. However, it had a much more tolerant and compassionate ethos than the strict Jewish orthodoxy of the time, as illustrated by the more understanding manner Jesus was shown as having in his dealings with people. The scene-stealing and word plagiarism between the stories from Jewish mythology in the Old Testament and the Gospels is obvious, perhaps not so much in modern English translations of the Bible, but certainly when comparing the original Greek and Hebrew, Aramaic versions of the Old and New Testaments, which is of course how the people of the time saw them. This was followed by two further Gospels, those of Matthew and Luke, again written by unknown scribes sometime during the 80s or 90s CE. These two Gospels repeated and somewhat modified the stories written in Mark, adding and claimed birth stories which were designed to make it appear as if a prophecy in Micah 5:2, which claimed a ruler over Israel would be born in Bethlehem, had been fulfilled, but by a Christian, not by a Jew. The entire story of Jesus, from his birth to his death, is completely mythical and has absolutely no non-biblical confirmation in any respect. The Gospel stories, and others, such as those in Acts and the Gospel of John, were written for one reason and one reason alone, to promote the new religion of Christianity with its more tolerant and compassionate ethos to the Jewish people of the time according to the then naive, superstitious and scientifically ignorant beliefs which people held. Today, we know that things such as virgin births, miracles and resurrection are all scientifically impossible, although they were believed as being true at the time the New Testament was written. Today, we also know that there's no non-biblical evidence to support any of the claims made about Jesus or what he's supposed to have done in his life. Dead people, whoever they might have been or been based on, do not come back to life and return. That's sheer fantasy, indoctrinated into followers of the Christian religion as a psychologically powerful way of maintaining their belief in its religious dogma. We don't exist, we're conceived, we're born, we live, we die, we cease to exist. That's it. The Bible is not a history book in any shape or form. Whilst it does contain a few references to real historical people and events, the majority of it is nothing more than a compilation of ancient myths and allegorical stories which reflect the naive, superstitious, and scientifically ignorant theological beliefs of certain groups of people who lived in the near Middle East between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, nothing more. The only reason people might believe that Jesus will return is because of religious indoctrination, and it's well known that such indoctrination suppresses critical thinking which would otherwise tell them that the stories about Jesus and his supposed return have no more truth to them than stories about Odysseus or Thor or Aphrodite or even Santa Claus.